Mason Garrison. How you doing?
I'm tremendous, and I didn't want to say this off camera because I wanted everyone to hear it, but I greatly appreciate you reaching out and being on here. And I was at home. My in-laws have a tremendous basement gym, and when I say tremendous, it's as good as it's going to get. It's obviously not a weight room, but they do have a treadmill. So when I'm home eating mom's cooking and doing all these things, I'm just absolutely torturing myself on the treadmill to try and get it out. And I've just got, among many things, your podcast on. I think last week I listened to all of Tony Holler's, Mary Beth, who I work with, obviously, and a smattering of others. So, anyway, I say all that to say I really appreciate the time and consideration. Um, some coaches have reached out to me to connect with, and I even ask like the guys I'm working with, I'm like, why me? What is it? It's that little creeping imposter syndrome that you kind of just gotta live with and get away. But I'm very humbled to have conversations like this. So to answer, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great as well. And honestly, I appreciate you saying that because I deal with the imposter syndrome with this because it's one of those things where like for you to even like mention that you watched something that I did with Tony Holler, like that just doesn't make that's still not making sense to me. And it's not that like, that's the thing that I've realized too. And like I said, I was telling you before, I just got back from Summer Strong and like you see these people on social media, you see these strength coaches, then you meet them in person and like, everybody's cooler in person than they actually are on their social media. So you just, but you kind of for some reason we put people that we haven't met like up on pedestal, especially people that have like a big following in the social media world and the sports performance world. But at the end of the day, we're all just people, and it's we're all just trying to get better and do our job the best we can. And I reach out to you just so because we met last year for 10 minutes, and then you gave a presentation for 50 minutes, and it's just one of those things where I think there's a ton of great strength coaches out there that are not at the Power Four, Division I football level, right? And I think it's something that, and I know that from being around a lot of D2 coaches. I mean, if you go back and look at, I think most of my guests on the podcast have been probably D2 coaches, or strength coaches that aren't working with Power Four football. And I think it's one of those things where that's where everybody's eyes go to because that's where all the money and all that is. But I think some of the best coaches, if not most of the best coaches, are at quote unquote the lower levels, if that makes sense. So it's something that I take a lot of pride in. It'd be great to go out and get the best, the quote unquote coaches that are working at the best level and with the best athletes. But I take a lot more pride in like you're going to probably be able to teach me something and teach everybody that's going to listen to this because we're probably, and I don't want to be any disrespect to your athletes, but we may be in a more similar shoes in terms of our roles and the responsibilities that we have, and maybe the lack of bells and whistles that we have, and the lack of resources that we may have, versus if I'm interviewing, somebody at the group of four or the Power Four level, or even the group of four level, or the group of whatever it is now, group of five. I can't keep track of all the acronyms at the Division
Yeah,
One
no
level
doubt.
nowadays. But and it's also like just even on the Olympic side, there's I interviewed, Olympic side coaches at the Division I level. Like I think they're sometimes a little bit more on a playing field closer to what I'm at. At the end of the day, like this, like I told you before, like this podcast started out for me connecting my former coaches and my current coaches. And that was kind of, and then that was to their benefit, but now it's selfishly, like it's definitely helped me. I've realized that I think this is going to be episode 41. I realized that every single episode I've done before this one, and I know from this one, I've gotten to be a better coach, and um, it's one of those things where, yeah, it's like that imposter syndrome. Like I even was telling my guys on the drive down, I'm like, man, I'm launching the podcast, even though it's already kind of been out, but it's like, do I really want to like launch it? Like, do I want to have a whole nother social media account for it? Like, there's still that aspect of like, it doesn't seem like it's deserving of that much extra time of my day because it's just me sitting down and talking shop with coaches. Like, it doesn't seem like it's going to be the next best thing, but if people that I know personally are listening to it, then that's really all I care about at the end of the day. Like that's what I want. I want all of us to be able to connect and get a little bit better from each other. So long-winded answer of I appreciate you being on here, and I'm looking forward to learning from you, getting to chat with you, and getting to know you a little bit more. So I like I said, I met you briefly. We've really only had maybe a 5-minute conversation of just meet and greet each other. And obviously I tried to do my research, looking at kind of the places that you've been and what your journey's been. But for those that maybe aren't as familiar with you, kind of just give us a rundown of you can either work from like high school to now or work from or like childhood to now, whatever direction you want to do, or work from where you're at now and work backwards and kind of tell us what where all your stops have been throughout your career.
I think I'm going to do all of that in a different intertwined thing that kind of circles back, if you don't mind.
Yeah, let's do it.
But I think journey is the most important part with a strength coach because it just gives you perspective on why they are, who they are, and kind of what brought them there. For me, I'm not an exercise science major. I didn't know this is kind of what I wanted to do until pretty much my last semester of college. And I struggled in school, not for lack of like intelligence or anything. And at certain times, it was definitely effort. I can say that, but it was really because I didn't know what my path was. And, that's kind of a whole different conversation on the education system I could have. But, the most impactful people, not the most, but some of the most impactful people in my professional and personal career were my strength coaches in college. And, I learned in high school from our head coach, is a very big mentor of mine. And I love his family. I was best man in one of his son's weddings. The weight room was the number one piece of building and reinventing culture. And I had kind of first heard that term in high school. So it was hugely impactful in that perspective, in that setting. And I knew the importance of it going into college. For me, I blew my knee out going into my senior year of high school. So I didn't get to play my last year. And that was really hard. And it kind of railroaded a lot of opportunities I had, but I knew I wanted to go to the University of Cincinnati. I was in love with the program, the coaches. My parents had both graduated from there. It was something that I just grew up with, and I wanted nothing more than be a part of it. So I fought tooth and nail to walk on there, and I was there for some really low points of the program and some really high points, and that was really cool to see. Two different coaching staffs, two different strength staffs, a lot of intermixing pieces. I still have to say I was on the football team. I will not say I played a whole bunch, but the experience was invaluable. And, in 4 years, I was coming off of my third knee surgery, I think. So I couldn't move. I just remember putting my pads on and just like not feeling comfortable. I couldn't be explosive. I couldn't express any sort of strength. Like I was just beat up. And I always try to channel it back to that chapter is kind of what helps me maybe have a niche perspective to strength coaching is I know what their bodies feel like. Because I tell everyone I got something wrong in every plane, whether it's shoulder, back, hip, knee, not ankle so far, although I did sprain my ankle running out onto the field last year for a game, which doesn't matter. But, when it was time to hang it up and I kind of had a lot of conversations with my coaches, the number one, our head football coach told me that our head strength coach would love to have me help out in the weight room. And it was a huge compliment, but mentally I just needed to get away from her a little bit. So I had a lot of conversations with the assistants down there, and they talked me through life. And one thing I'll always respect is no one ever told me what to do. They just gave me some thinking tools to kind of process all that. But to make a long story short, I ended up walking away from the game, and I had to do an internship at a high school. So I did what was easy. I went to my high school that I graduated from, did an internship at the athletic department. I figured, why not coach? I don't know what it was, but I was like, I'll just help out with football. And one of my best friends was with me doing it. So we helped ninth grade football, got roped into ninth grade basketball, which is an absolute grinder. But I fell in love with the weight room piece. That was something that I kind of jumped on right away. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know anything. I was regurgitating everything I had just done as a player, with no why behind any of it. And I went through that, and I was kind of going into the next season. So this would have been 2020. And I just stayed in contact with Coach Brady Collins and his staff at Cincinnati. And I knew, I was like, this is just what I kind of want to do. So I went back and interned during COVID, which I tease the guys that have kind of come up after me. Like, if you weren't in it during COVID, you really weren't in it. It was quite the experience. I lost all of my fat O lineman weight interning and being outside for 12, 15 hours a day. And again, through it, I kind of was just finding my path, and you go through that Dunning-Kruger of thinking you're a genius and then realizing you don't know anything, and then kind of coming out of that valley. Failed my CSCS twice. And I think if there's one thing that I would characterize my career as is like, taking pride in learning in your failures. My resume is nothing but failures over and over and over again. Whether it's the certification, missing out on jobs, whatever it is. But, I interned with a lot of people that helped my development and the coaches. And, what I learned is, you're right where you're supposed to be at this point in time. So I interned 2020, partially 2021. And then I was afforded an opportunity to go to Wittenberg University, had my USAW. So that was good enough, and eventually earned my certification. They had a full-time role, which was tremendous. So I was able to kind of shift into that. And I had a good relationship with the previous head strength coach here for football. And they created an assistant football only job. And I really wasn't going to leave WIT because it was close to home. I knew I could learn a lot. I needed to learn a lot. And it was just the right opportunity. So I came here, had a lot of connections and relationships with the football coaches and staff. I was an assistant for 2 years, and then our head guy, he moved on, and our head coach, Coach Doug Phillips, afforded me the opportunity to step into this head role. And just like any role, you're really never ready for it. But I guess you're, as I kind of heard someone talk about at the conference a couple weeks ago, you just trust your training and lean on those around you. And I've been in this role since July 2024. So here we are. This will be my third season in charge, and that's where we're at. That's kind of in a nutshell, I guess.
Yeah, I mean that's an awesome story, and again, that's another thing that I knew was the case, but every like conversation I get to have with a coach, you just find out how different and how unique. Like I knew that everybody's path was kind of different. Everybody, not everybody goes from intern to GA to assistant to director, like all like in that perfect plan, and that your dream school or dream job or whatever it may be. But it's always nice to like hear again from somebody else, like, and just that you didn't even know, I guess that'd be what, like 7 years ago, you didn't even know if this is what, like, you didn't even know that this was going to be your career. And then here you are going into year 3 of what I would assume you would believe, you would believe is what you're exactly supposed to be doing as your job. So, and it's something that I feel the same way. I feel like I couldn't imagine not being a strength coach. Are you still close, with, Coach Brady Collins? Cause I know he's somewhere Wisconsin.
Yep. Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
University of Wisconsin.
And then do you know, are you still close with him? You still stay in contact?
Absolutely. All those guys. That staff is pretty much intact. A couple here and there. I'm very close with all of them though. Yeah.
Gotcha. And then actually, at Summer Strong, Nico Palazetti, the new head strength coach at Cincinnati, was down there presenting. So do you know him?
Yes. Yeah. So I interned and played for Coach Flino and Coach Higgins. Coach Higgins is at Ohio State. Coach Flino is at Wisconsin. Those two were teammates with Coach Palazetti at Michigan State. So kind of through them and through connections. And actually, when Nico was at Ohio State, so I was like calling him when I was an assistant here about like running our internship. So we've kind of developed a pretty cool relationship. And obviously he's at my alma mater. So I try to, and he's a factory of electricity. So I try every time I see something out there with him, I'm trying to watch it or absorb.
Yeah. And that's kind of, I knew of him, but I wasn't really familiar with him. And yeah, his presentation, you could just tell the energy just radiating from him and just the passion and stuff like that. So it was super motivating. And he talked about a lot about like their culture. And honestly, I took a couple things away from that he talked about that I thought was cool. But anyway, I just didn't know if, again, that's the other thing too, if you find out is how small this coaching world is too. When you start doing this podcast and you realize like how many people actually are doing our job. It really is not that many people that are actually doing our jobs.
So he was at the CSCCA and I was talking to him on the floor of it. And Coach Ken Maney was there, who he played for, who, I indirectly idolize, absorb as much of his content as I possibly can, all the people that have come that I've worked for. So he was standing right there, 10 feet away from me. And I looked at Coach Nico and I was like, hey, you got to introduce me. And without even thinking about it, he's like, let's go. And he introduced me to Coach Manny, and it was just a cool experience. So Nico's a first-class guy, 100%.
Yeah, that's awesome. what is your like department look like? How many assistants, GAs? I know we talked to Mary Beth a little bit about how kind of the whole structure set up, but just specifically for football, how does that work for you? And what you can also then tie that into like what are, like you said, you're going into year three, you go back to July of 20, you said 2024, right? July of
Mhm.
2024, with this, break down your staff and what it looks like, but then also what is the standards and the culture that you guys have tried to set and instill with Youngstown State football?
Yeah, we have a tremendous setup. Coach Phillips is extremely bought in to strength and conditioning, which is great. So we have myself, which is football only, and I have a full-time assistant who's football only. And then I've got 3 graduate assistants that work with football. So in terms of staffing, we're incredibly well staffed. Culture wise, I guess on the staff, I try to treat them like they are Power 4 football assistants, obviously with the caveat that I know they have other responsibilities, right? School, their own teams that they're training. That's what I want. The kind of other part of that is I want it to be very, I call us a tribe, very close knit, tight. Sometimes that's hard because I'm experiencing this year where my age will increase the longer I'm here, but the age of graduate assistants that come in doesn't necessarily. It's usually 22 to 24, which doesn't sound like a big difference, but it can be. So the way they look at me, I'm realizing is a little bit different than what it was 3 years ago. So continuing for them to get comfortable and kind of take the autonomy that I want them to know that they have and develop on their own, and also feel comfortable asking questions and being proactive about that sort of development. I don't know if that kind of fully answers the cultural question, but that's those are my goals. That's my mission. And then something that's a challenge to me is continuing to be better in that leadership role, because it's great to have a lot of staff members, but you also got to remember that like they can't read my mind, and I can't read theirs. So enhancing communication in all aspects is super important, and it's challenging, but it's a fun challenge. But I don't know if that kind of answers your question. I kind
No,
of
it,
just went
it
a little.
it it definitely does. It definitely does. I mean, I think and again, Mary Beth and I spent quite a bit of time talking about GAs and staff development and things like that, and it's something that I probably undervalued early in my career, and now it's something that I absolutely like love having that opportunity to be able to help, coach and develop young coaches. And I think I told her, I don't know if I was telling her or if I was when I was talking to the Mason brothers, like I sometimes look back at my career and I'm equally, if not more, excited about the young coaches that I've been able to like help along their way, along their journey, as I am the athletes that I've been able to coach and help along the way. Right. And obviously there's way more athletes, but it's one of those where you don't really get to know the athletes as well as what you might get to know some of these coaches that you're on the floor with 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 hours a week sometimes. So it's definitely something that's really cool. And from that leadership development standpoint and that mentorship, um, football specifically, because you mentioned like the coaches bought into to S&C, like how have you with your own like principles and kind of mission statement as a strength coach, how did you tie that in? Because that's something that I struggle with a fair amount because every team kind of has like their own team culture, and I'm trying to take what we do as a weight room culture and make that still work for all the teams. Because sometimes most of the time we are either as tough or tougher on the kids in the weight room than they are with their sport team, or within their sport like kind of structure. How do you take like what your standards are, like what your principles are, and mesh that with what the football program was and is, and kind of what are some of maybe those pillars and principles that you guys stand by as a S&C department blended with football program?
Yeah, I think it starts with, obviously it starts with trust. And this is going to sound kind of insane, but for me, when I took over in 2024, it was basically 3 weeks before camp. It was kind of a unique situation, and we were not very good for a plethora of reasons. For a lot of reasons that don't really matter at this point, but we just weren't a very good football team. We went 4-8. We were only competitive in a couple of those losses. Most of them weren't. So my first time or opportunity, I guess, going into the winter of 2025 was very easy in a way, because I can look at our program and say, we are not very good. We need to get bigger. We need to get faster. We need to get stronger. But ultimately, we need to get more tough and more resilient. And when you can hold that message up and say, there's no arguing because we were 4-8, this is what we need to do. It was a little bit easier for me to instill trust amongst the coaches because, for one, we had a great group of kids, young men, I should say, that bought into that message and did a great job with our training. And then also, I knew going into it that we needed to kind of flip things on their head. The training had to be different, obviously within the confines, methodologies, there's things that I believe in, but it needs to be done differently for the sake of freshness and buy-in. So my opportunity to kind of earn that trust was a little bit easier just because of kind of what we had recently gone through, if that makes sense. So, Coach Phillips gave me a ton of autonomy, obviously with alignment of what he believes in. And we kind of come from the same background, so to speak. So what we believe in is very similar. But within the standards and values of the program, what our messaging was going to be, right? What we were going to focus on, all the little detailed messaging things I wanted to drive across, and also kind of the simplicity of it, of we just need to get better each day. So, our standards, and the one thing I'll say about Coach Phillips too is he's not someone that just wants to do the same thing we've always done because that's what we've always done. So even like our core values and all those wordy things that coaches have, like he's constantly looking to enhance those, which is great because, that keeps us in alignment. So we're not a super wordy program, but we are in the same sense, if that makes sense. We have things that we fall back on, our core values and what we believe in, but it also kind of comes back to, where are we? We're at Youngstown State University. It's Grit U. So everything we're going to be doing is done with a very intentional mentality, with a gritty mentality. We want to be a program that can kind of thrive in adversity. And as a strength coach, like that's like music to my ears. Like that's what we love to talk about all the time. So I don't know. I might not have answered your question, but
No. I mean, I think that's awesome because I'm one of those where I definitely like I love watching a Jocko Willink or a David Goggins like hype video as much as anybody. I believe that stuff does help, but it is also, and I will definitely use some catchphrases here and there, but it's one of those where like that stuff still doesn't matter if you're letting kids show up late to lift, if you're letting kids like get away with bad reps, if you're letting kids get away with like not like logging their work. I mean, again, we use Trainer Road, so it's like one of those things where like I'll get mad at a kid, hey, you just did a PR, that's awesome. And then when I check their phone the next day, they didn't log it. And it's like, look, that was for your success. That doesn't affect me as a coach.
right.
So that's one of those things where like, yes, I can get you hyped up and say the coolest catchphrase in the world so that you hit this PR, and that's great. But on the back end, did you also do the little detailed stuff that we need you to do to keep track of that, record? Because it's, we got 435 kids. I need every one of them to have attention to detail to how they're putting stuff in their phone. And it's just, so it's one of those things where like all that catchphrase stuff and all that, I love that stuff. I love the raw stuff, but not more than I love attention to detail and just being accountable and doing the little things. All those things are equally as important. So I think the way you said it is right. Like you guys might not have 10 pillars that are going to be the same 10 pillars for the next 20 years. Like it's something where like, no, we're going to fluctuate those things and those messages based off what we need to get out of our kids, and is that kind of what you're getting at? It's like that might change day by day, week by week, month by month, season by season, based off where we need to continue to get better at.
Yeah. And, I think the core beliefs of the program, how do I say it? They are, you can always fall back on them. So to have too many, or to have a very, like you said, 10 pillars, to have all these things, like at what point does everything not fall under accountability or honesty? Like you can tie almost all of your actions back to those things. So obviously, like we have things that we abide by as a program. We have things that we abide by in our own personal integrity. And ultimately, like, can we get that to translate? Can we get that to be important to the young athletes? Because once it's important to them, then obviously we begin to have a little traction. And like, I'll be honest, like I say my first year in the off season was easy, right? Nothing's easy, but the messaging could kind of come home. Well, now we have a little bit of success and we've got a very senior dominant team. Now it becomes challenging because like, hey, we have been successful and we have a high ceiling, but are you going to be complacent? Are you going to just say, well, we were good, we added some guys, we should be better, or are you actually going to be men of action? And then also not creating burnout. Like if I'm saying the same things for 900 consecutive days, like it's going to fall on deaf ears. So that's kind of my mindset and approach. And I think one thing I learned from Coach Brady and his staff was like being fresh with everything we do. Not shying away from what we built a foundation upon, but like if we're just doing the same things over and over and over again, it's not necessarily going to work. Now, on the other end, like you had mentioned the difference in like a training setting versus a practice setting. And it's super easy to be like, why isn't that coach making them do this? This is a standard in our weight room. You got to continually be persistent with the things you believe in. Like, does that really pertain to that drill? Not really. So it doesn't really matter. But on my end, after practice, Coach Phillips lets me speak every day. And I need to make sure like, hey, if you're doing something, you are the one that needs to be attentive to these things. Your body language has to match the expectation of a Friday run versus a Saturday spring practice. So I think just being consistent, persistent, and walking that line of like not being a broken record, but also like I'm going to be at the same time.
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. And I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Ideal Team Player.
Mm-mm.
It's a really good book. So when our head football coach got hired 2 years ago, it was something that he made like the leadership council read. And in the book, it basically boils it down to like where being a good teammate, you have 3 qualities. You're humble, you're hungry, and you're smart. And I think it's one of those where you can have all these like, hey, we want to be accountability, we want to be disciplined, we want to be hardworking, we want to be tough, like we want to make the right. All those things can even be boiled down to: are you hungry? Do you want, like, how bad do you actually want to win? Sorry, how bad do you actually want to win? Right? Are you humble? How coachable are you? Right? How accountable are you? How good of a person are you? And then are you smart? Are you making the right decisions? Like, so it's one of those where like I'd never heard of that book, and I read it and I was like, holy crap. Like, and then what we actually did was what the players did was, they actually like got in their accountability groups, and then they started basically bucketing their guys. Like, is this guy really hungry and really humble, but he doesn't have great like emotional intelligence, like doesn't study the playbook, like that kind of stuff, right? Is this a person that's like very hardworking, but they're also not very coachable? Like, so it allows you to kind of like figure out, okay, where do we want to put all of our efforts in terms of maybe what our message is. Hey, we have a really hardworking team. We have a really hungry team, but maybe we're just not making right decisions. Maybe we're not doing things we should be doing recovery wise, or on the weekends, or even in games, or, in the classroom, things like that. So it allows you to kind of hone in on where maybe you as a team, or you as a person, or you as a staff lack. I have not made my staff all read it. They've all had to, I kind of make them do books and like read books and stuff throughout the semester, but not all of them have read that book yet. But it's definitely something that I think every staff should do. Probably every new turn of a cycle of staff. It's just a good book to kind of figure out where everybody's at, and throw yourself in there too. Like, okay, I want you guys as a staff to rate me hungry, humble, and smart as a leader, as a coach, as a mentor, because it's something that you kind of open up a lot of good conversation where we can all get better. You mentioned the Wittenberg, and I have that in here, and again, being at the Division II level, I have a lot of respect for D2 strength coaches, D3 strength coaches, high school strength coaches, FCS strength coaches. What was maybe one of or multiple, of big takeaways in terms of just your development as a coach, being at that D3 level, where again, you don't maybe not have as many resources, maybe not have any assistants or as many assistants, maybe just, again, being a young coach in general, like what were some of those big takeaways that you had from that experience?
Yeah, I think I'll start from the beginning with that. Is like when I was interning in 2021, I had, and I'll preface too with, the best thing that could happen to me at that time in my life was not passing the CSCS when I did, because I needed, as someone that didn't have like this elaborate exercise science background, I needed to learn that 3 or 4 times over that information. And we can all as strength coaches be like, oh, it's the textbook and whatever, but like also knowing those core fundamentals of training are very important. So, I had missed it for the second time. I had interviewed for a pretty prestigious high school job and didn't get it. So at this point, you're kind of starting to question, like, what am I doing? I haven't made money in a year and a half plus. Like, is this really what I want to do? And this opportunity was kind of put out there from the guys that I was working under. And just like I talked about, like being young and dumb, I was like, D3, like, what is this? Like, what's it looking like? And the Coach Updegraff, who was the head coach or head strength coach at that time, I knew he was coming from Ohio State, so I knew he was kind of connected with our coaching tree. So immediately that was like, that made sense. I'm like, okay, like this could be a good opportunity. And then I interviewed and I took a site visit, and Coach Updegraff, the way he kind of is, he's like, so do you want it or not? And I'm like, okay. And I kind of just jumped at it. And Wittenberg's great. It's got some of the best facilities in the entire country, I think, at any level. I mean, it's a brand new 16 full rack weight room, track or turf down the middle, auxiliary room with high-speed treadmills attached to the indoor facility, proximal to the football field. So it was just such a great opportunity. And there was 3 of us. It was myself, the full-time strength coach who preceded me, and then our head strength coach. And Division III has every sport. Their model is they believe in, enrollment and increasing enrollment numbers. And the number one modality to do that is going to be through athletics. So every single sport. So I think on my LinkedIn or whatever, it says like 3 sports plus football, but really that's men's and women's. So it was like 8 different sports plus football, plus any coverage in case someone else needed it. So, failing the test and then getting that experience was, putting me in a frying pan and just seeing if I can get out. And that's exactly what I needed. So I think the number one takeaway was like just being engulfed in so many different elements of training. I had women's lacrosse, men's and women's volleyball, golf, swimming and diving, assisted with other sports here and there, and obviously football. So the first biggest takeaway was like, I needed to be thrown in the fire. Like that was the best opportunity for me to learn with what I needed to learn, and a multitude of reasons, like 1, time management, but 2, like trusting my training. When I first started there, it was like I'd almost forgotten everything I just learned as an intern. And then kind of slowly coming back and realizing like, how to do this, the steps that it takes, what works, what doesn't, what's important, what's not, what's going to hurt them, what's intense, like kind of working those things out, and for lack of a better term, kind of a forgiving environment. And then learning how to speak to a team, learning how to be a leader, learning how to operate with different personalities, and, above all too, like just perseverance. I was completely chained to my desk at any given time, whether it was programming or studying for the exam. So doing all these things, and, Coach Updegraff was incredibly demanding, when I wouldn't trade, his mentorship in that role or the way he went about things, or kind of brought me and fostered me along at all, because once I passed that test and was given the opportunity to be full-time, it was like the greatest accomplishment of anything I've ever done. And it kind of parlayed me into other opportunities, but just being surrounded by strength and conditioning constantly, and learning like what you have to value. Like you can't do everything. It's not like I got a whole lot of field time. So if I did, like I had to make it count. I had to make it important. Division III level is also like weight room. I don't know about other schools, but I know weight room at Wittenberg was not a new concept, but like newer. So how to communicate with these coaches, like what was their priority? Do they really believe and buy in? And there was coaches I really had to earn their trust. Women's volleyball, for example, I now have a great relationship with their coach, but at the time when when I was assigned their team, and volleyball, who was the perennial powerhouse of the program, wasn't with the head guy, like there was some friction. So being persistent and kind of earning the trust and really grinding, and it helped me because once I left there, like nothing was really that challenging. You know, there's very few things in this role that phase me. So sometimes I worry, like when I'm bringing other people in, if they don't have similar experience, I'm kind of like, well, are they going to be able to handle this workload? And if they are they going to have the perspective of this isn't that hard and I can do really well here and there? But um, again, I apologize for rambling, but it was the exact place I needed to be to develop for where I was at.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's awesome. That makes sense. And yeah, the thing you said about like at the end about hiring people and bringing people in, like, man, if your previous experience was like you were like a paid intern at Mike Boyle or like Exos or somewhere like that, like Landau Performance, like I'm gonna be like, that's awesome experience. And I think you probably have seen some cool stuff, but at the end of the day, I also don't know, like, have you also coached the worst athlete on the planet? Like, cause that's something that you're
Yeah.
definitely gonna like, that's a skill in and of itself. And it's something where like, you mentioned about like the D3 level kind of, you know, being a like a pressure cooker, like that's something where like at the Division 2 level, and it's also like a low risk like situation where like at the Division 2 level, like almost anything you do is going to help the athletes
Mm-hmm.
as long as you can coach them in it. Like as long as you can make them somewhat proficient in doing an RDL, like they're going to get benefit from the RDL. Like you're never going to maximize the lowest hanging fruit exercises as long as we as coaches can coach the heck out of it. So I think it's one of those where, again, from a coach development standpoint, um, I think interning, GAing, coaching at a lower level, again, quote unquote lower level, it helps expedite your development because you're going to get thrown in the trenches a lot quicker and a lot sooner versus being like maybe an intern at a Division 1 where you're basically you're literally just setting up and watching training sessions. You're never getting to actually lead a warm up. And I've seen that happen where we've had kids come from, pretty good programs, and then you're like doing the first week of internship development with them, and they like freeze when they have to lead a group of peers through a warm up. And it's like, I thought you just spent, so and so a year at a Division 1 or at a high level private facility. And then they just freeze because they've actually never actually had to coach. They've just seen other people coach. So I definitely think that's awesome. Again, I give a lot of credit that, like, even though I'm 12 years into my career, being at Fairmont has been the best thing for me. Like, it's been the best job because of the leadership responsibility as well as just being able to coach and build those relationships with the coaches and all that. Um, so at Youngstown, and I know I mentioned to you before, like I definitely want to get into player data and some of the GPS stuff that you guys are looking at, but um, what other like tech are you guys doing? And again, I'm a tech person. If it helps us, you know, train our athletes better, I'm not a tech person just for the sake of tech. So what kind of tech stuff are you guys using that you feel like has been valuable? And then how are you implementing it? Why do you think it's valuable? How has it kind of influenced what you do? If there is anything, I mean, again, could just be your coaching eye is what influences your programming the most. But what are some of those things that if you are using any type of sports science, technology stuff, um, what it is, why you think it's valuable, how it's been valuable, and how you're implementing it?
Yeah, no, I think tech is super cool. And like when you're talking shop about it and you're like, oh, if we had this, we could do X, Y, and Z, that'd be so awesome. But then when you have it and it comes to the execution portion of it, it's like, oh, I actually don't know what I'm doing. And now I just have a bunch of data points. So I don't know. I'll always default to like if you are truly and kind of invested when you're around the athletes, the coaching eye is almost undefeated. Um, from the moment they kind of walk into the room till they go through the training session till they leave. So I think you can always fall back on that. So I'll preface with technology is great, but you don't have to have it. We are super blessed here. We do have force plates. We have velocity-based training opportunities. And recently, the past 2 years, we have GPS opportunities, and it's great. If I did not have my assistant, Coach Hunter Pembleton, there's a lot of that stuff that would probably go by the wayside because it would be to do it efficiently, it would be incredibly time demanding. And I don't think like I mean, don't get me wrong, like you could have them jump on the four stack and post their scores and enhance competitive spirit. Like, sure, absolutely. You could do the same thing with, their top miles per hour speed on the GPS or velocity, meters per second on squats, whatever it is. Like, you can make something out of it. But I think for what it's meant and designed for, like, you kind of truly need someone to dedicate time and energy to it. And Hunter does a great job. For us, we do utilize the four stacks. We do utilize velocity-based training. We do utilize GPS, and we do utilize body weight. So all of those things, he has some magical scoring system that he uses. And I mean, I give him a hard time all the time. He spends more time behind his computer coding with Claude or whatever it might be, then I need to start dragging his butt to the training room or the weight room to start lifting again. But we take all of those things and we kind of have readiness scores. So when we talk about coach's eyes, like the coaching eye also allows us to read the scores that they have and know and take it with a grain of salt of like why they might be in the situation that they are. And it could give us all these data points. And on the sheet, it could say, well, this player is going to die tomorrow because he is so burnt out and whatever. And then they go out, you do your reporting, you talk to your trainers, you talk to your coaches, you talk to the player, whatever, and they go out and they set the world on fire. So it's like, okay, I guess you just defied science. I don't know what to say. Or in the other case, it tells you that they're real beat up. You talk to them, you can see their energy levels are low. They've got tendonitis flaring up, and you make your adjustments and your modifications, and you're like, all right, great, this stuff works, and I'm the biggest believer in the world, and thank God we have this. So, we utilize it. It's great. I'm never going to sit here and be like, especially for programs that don't have those things, like, oh, it doesn't matter. They're just tools, just like anything. It's a tool that you have to continue to learn how to utilize and implement and when to fully trust it versus when not to. I'm not, as much as it puts facts in front of me, I'm not a genie. I can't read my magic globe and be like, oh, this is what's going to happen or this isn't. It's great. Now, player data has been unbelievable. The number one piece, and not to get on a sales pitch for them, but like their customer service is great. We went through a lot of different companies, and not that theirs wasn't, but they fit what we needed really well. We're a dome team. And when I say that, I mean, we're indoors most of the year because it gets so cold. And like last year, we played 3 road games in domes. So we need capabilities of having indoor, LPS that's also going to be affordable. And when things don't go well with it or software breaks down, whatever, they provide a ton of opportunities to help us. I'll say the same thing about Vault. I'll say the same thing about Vitruve with our velocity-based units. So all of those things are really great. You don't need them. If I was by myself, the only thing I would probably utilize is a scale and weigh these guys in and see where they're at daily. So it's good, but if you don't have the manpower, it becomes very challenging. So I can totally understand where all these Power 4 programs are sinking millions of dollars into sports science and sports science staff. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at with that. And not to keep going, but like I said, the coaching eye is great. But for like the higher level athletes that we do have, we have an incredibly gifted athlete in our starting quarterback, and he's also takes care of himself and is high character. So it's really hard to tell where he's at sometimes because his attitude never really changes. But from someone that came from a program that didn't use a whole lot of VBT to where I kind of rely on it sometimes for those higher end athletes that I kind of need to protect who have hit certain KPIs, 2 or 3 times over, like this is going to help me get a little bit closer insight. Oh, could he squat 505? Yes, but he hit 475 right in that speed zone that we kind of wanted him to hit. Now I know if I just relied on my coaching eye, who knows? So that's where those kind of things help.
Yeah, and I think what you said. I mean, you said the phrase "coaching eye almost never lies." Like I think that for sure is always going to stand the test of time. And one thing that so obviously we spent a 7.5 hour drive down and back for Summer Strong last weekend, and I had 2 of my assistants in the car, and one of them has I mean, they both have experience with sports science, and the one has a lot. And that's kind of what I was telling him. Like, look, because I'm thinking about getting volleyed force plates. And what my thing is, like, I don't want those. I don't want them just to become fancy jump mats. Like, I don't want them just to become $2,000 jump mats. I also don't want them to make me have to work an extra 5 to 10 hours a week. So it's one of those where I need to figure out, you know, where do we draw the line of, okay, here's what we think is going on with this athlete right now. Like you said, that your quarterback or your starting running back or your starting point guard on the basketball team that's just, playing 40 minutes a game or playing 80 snaps a game if it's your starting running back. Like, here's what I see when they walk in the weight room. Here's what I'm seeing on the plates. Here's what their GPS numbers are saying. Here's what he's going to the trainers and talking about. Here's what the coaches are seeing on film. Like, it needs to be all of that. It can't just be like, all right, their MRSI is down. Coach, don't let this kid practice today.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, first of all, a coach is not going to necessarily just be like, all right, yep, that's fine. I'll just say that this kid's not going to practice it. Because the thing that you'll learn is kids are smart, right? They're going to take path of least resistance. They're going to figure out that if they just don't jump as hard as they can, and they can almost cheat the test to get a low score just as much as they're going to try to cheat a test to get a high score, and they know that they're going to get out of doing work, like, that definitely is going to happen. Like, there are kids that will do that. All right. And then there's kids like your quarterback that are actually beat up and do need a day off. And you can throw every test metric at them that you want, and they're going to still be within like a certain threshold of where they're normally at, because they're just that type of wired person. So I think it's one of those where it has to go. I actually just sent a message to my coaches like an hour or two before we started talking and I was listening to a podcast, with Joe Ken, and he was talking about how there's evidence-based practice, right? That's taking what we see in a lab and trying to extrapolate that to athletics, versus practice-based evidence, taking what we see in the weight room and trying to figure out, okay, how can sports science explain what we're seeing in the weight room? And I think that's what, again, most strength coaches, especially strength coaches that have went through part of their career without sports science, right?
Mm-hmm.
We see things in the weight room where it's like, okay, why is this kid jump higher than this kid? Right? There just doesn't seem like it should make sense, right? But then you get maybe you get him on a force plate and you're like, all right, now it's because his eccentric and concentric rate of force development is so much higher, right? His time to take off is so much shorter, right? Whatever metric it may be, you kind of use science to basically more confirm or even disprove what your coaching hypothesis is on certain athletes in certain situations. So that's, to me, like kind of the best case scenario. And that's what I'm hoping that we're able to do at Fairmont, if and when we get these force plates, with the player data stuff. And I told you before I was chatting with the guy before, I got a call with him later this week. What was your guys? Was it you? Was it the trainers? Was it the football staff? Kind of who was the initiator of like, hey, we need to start at least trying to collect some GPS workload data? How did that go? I know Nick uses it over on the basketball side as well with Connexon stuff. But who was kind of the initiator of that? What was the reasoning behind it? And then kind of how does that look day to day in terms of what you said Hunter's doing and kind of the reports that he's putting together? Basically just give us kind of the rundown on why, what, and how you guys are using it and benefiting from it.
The initial conversation was, it was Hunter that brought it up, that wanted it, because we got it last spring. We started going through some trials with some different companies last spring, and he really wanted to do it, and has a very persuasive way of getting me to go ask for money. But ultimately he kind of expressed the importance of it and what we would get out of it. And, last spring, my perspective is, listen, I don't need to add a bunch of new stuff to my brain. Like, we just need to get better and set ourselves up for success. So, I kind of let him reach out to whoever he wanted to reach out to. And we talked through a plethora of companies. And obviously it always kind of comes back to cost. Like I said, all the respect in the world to Catapult, but we're not a university that can afford that. Very few are, especially being such an indoor team. So, the metrics and things are pretty much across the board going to be the same. So then it comes back to price, and then price per unit. And then, player data specifically, like their dashboard and their app are so easy to use. Like a not so smart guy like myself who doesn't fancy himself a sports science genius, like I can get on there and be like, oh, okay, this all makes sense. So that was kind of where the process went. And then obviously you have to, if you're asking for money from a program, like you have to be able to say why it's important, and telling coaches that it's important because it'll tell us when we should practice less is definitely not the route you want to choose. So it's creating reports that are meaningful and helpful, and saying, hey, this is the situation we're in. This is why we think it's important. This is what we need it for. And it, like I said, Coach Phillips is very invested in strength and conditioning. But in the world of NIL, like, you really got to make it count. So that comes back to us. Okay, well, here's the situation. We're an old team, and we need to be probably the most cognizant of our, total distance in practice, or, what we're hitting leading up to camp, or how do we problem solve? Perfect example, when we were kind of still in the trial phase last fall camp is, in summer training, you're very rarely, if ever, going to be able to hit the amount of distance that they're about to hit in camp. So you hope you set them up for success, and then you get into camp, and then 4 consecutive days of a lot of distance of all different types hits them, and then soft tissue might arise. How do we take the information that we have and say, why didn't you prevent this? Well, you can't prevent it, but here's how we can retroactively respond and make these adjustments in our practice phases and be more efficient here and cut down on distance here. And again, I can't give him enough credit, but Coach Phillips' ability to hear what we're saying and take it and listen to it and say, okay, now it's not even up for, I don't even have to say much. We can sit in a staff meeting and he's already, tailoring our practice script and reminding coaches, like, we need to be smart about how we travel to and from drill. We need to be smart about what we're doing with special teams. We need to push here and pull back here. So, that was kind of the process of it. Like I said, it wasn't a tool that I necessarily wanted on my plate at the time, as great as I think it is. But again, having someone like Hunter who can really dissect the data, and honestly, that's like his favorite thing to do in the world anyway. So it's great for him. It's been super beneficial. I would say it's probably, GPS specifically is my experience so far. Unfortunately, with football, is it's going to give you a little bit more, like, as I said, retroactive information, meaning you're going to have to analyze to see how you can avoid certain things versus predict things. Because like we talked about before, like, the metrics don't always line up to products, but if the product is something, injury wise or, acute or chronic or trend wise, like, then we can really dissect it and be like, this is our next course of action, if that kind of makes sense.
No, it definitely does. I mean, so you mentioned earlier about you'd watched some of the podcasts. Did you happen to see, or do you know who Pedro Aruza is? He's the head football coach at Randolph-Macon.
Yes.
Okay, so when I interviewed him, because he unofficially does like the sprint-based football, like kind of that Tony Holler, like, minimal effective dose mentality. He's been doing that for like 10 to 15 years there now, and they've had a lot of, they're like literally the 3rd best Division III program in the country. And one thing that I probably should have done a better job of trying to pry out of him, and I don't know if you can answer this from what you've seen, having played college football, is what do you think in football practice? And again, this isn't, I don't want you to say this because you're bashing football coaches, because that's not, because I mentioned it in the Tony Holler podcast and in Coach Aruza, I mentioned about the idea of like junk volume, right? And I people hear junk volume and they think that it means that I think it's like that's bad coaching. I just mean it's something that I don't know if you need to do it all the time. Like, I don't know if you need to do like 7-on-7 all the time. I don't know if you need to do, live kickoff and kick return all the time. I don't know if you need to, you know what I mean? Like, there's an aspect of this game. And again, I'm one of those where I think the more live reps you can do, the better off you are. And anything that's sub live game speeds is to an extent junk volume, right? My mind goes to, it's either a walkthrough or it's full game. It's close to game speed as you can get in practice, which you can't get fully game speed in practice anyway. It's everything else in between is kind of like, again, it's like, all right, I'm either gonna be doing like power training or I'm gonna doing heavy like strength work. Everything else in between is kind of no man's land, right? So from a football player's perspective, like having played college football, like do you know of an example of something that you guys have talked about, like you and Hunter, and you've sat down with the sport coaches and you're like, hey, we had this injury happen, or we're trending this direction, maybe back off on these phases of practice. Like, and I know, again, I know you're not a football coach. I don't want to like make you say something, like talk about something that maybe you're not comfortable in, but is there anything that you do feel like you've at least, they've said to you guys of like, hey, we can cut this out because that's just extra volume that we don't need, extra low speed, excessive workload, excessive wear and tear that we don't need?
You know, I would say with those examples, nothing ever that specific. Like in the spring, for example, like we had special teams drills where the distance was like 40 something yards. And it was interesting because in my head, I'm listening, and it's a great opportunity for the kids to hit the residuals or whatever you want to call it in that drill. But the spirit of what he was saying is, hey, that's unnecessary distance. We don't necessarily need to do that at where we're at this time of the year. So that's kind of like the head coaching piece. I've had the assistants are all great too, because I would say more so there's like individual player examples where I go to their position coach and I'm like, hey, this is our reasoning for why I'm telling you this, but this player is cooked. And I can also tell you from what I just experienced in the weight room with him, this is how we need to adjust. And it created a very unique and kind of cool open door where we're kind of going back and forth. And he's asking me my opinion. And in my head, I'm like, this is unbelievable that he's so bought into what we're telling him. Like last camp, like I said, like we had a bunch of hamstrings, just like I think most programs probably do. So I try not to get too upset about it. But hey, we just did routes on air 3 or 4 days in a row and pat and go and 7-on-7. And we're talking full field, open it up. Like the kids that are going to get through this are going to get calloused and they're going to get resilient, but you can't be surprised when the other ones are not. And soft tissue from a return to place perspective that we've learned can be very tricky. So something that you think might take 7 to 10 days ends up taking 14 to 20 days. Now we're talking a lot of time missed in practice. So it takes time. There's been a ton of examples where we just kind of have to work together and figure it out and be patient with each other and know that in certain areas, like we think we can't pull back in the weight room and we might need to, or vice versa. Like we think they should pull back in football and they don't think they should. So to answer your question, like it's a fluid situation. No one really gets like offended if we make suggestions, and I certainly don't get offended if I go to the coach and I'm like, hey, I don't think we should do this, or I think we should do it differently, and he tells me to go kick rocks. Not that happens very often, but there's different unique circumstances. Our job, what I'll say about strength and conditioning for football is it's completely different than any other sport, because any other sport, obviously there's little nuances, but like no other sport is training to be protected from running into each other for 60 plus minutes. So it's like just a slew of different adaptations we need to hit in a certain period of time that one methodology or one approach are never going to be just like finite, if you get what I'm trying to say. So we have to take all these things into consideration, like culture being the number one piece. Like, what is the culture of football as a sport? What is the physicality and competitive culture of us as a program? How do we tie that into what we want to do on the field to build toughness? But how do we also tie that into readiness, performance, and availability? And it's a lot of moving parts. So it's never going to be perfect, and we can't get offended if it doesn't go exactly how we want, because also we're not football coaches. I couldn't tell you how to read a defense or, run a special teams drill or do anything like that. So if that kind of answers your question.
No, it definitely does. And again, I think that's something that I'm probably at some point for me to have a better understanding. Like, and one thing that because we do have connects on for our football guys. I'm I'm not, I don't know if we utilize Connexon to the best of our ability because of our staff limitations, our time limitations, but I also think that that's partly because I don't think Connexon's great for like a small staff organization, because we don't have the time to sit down and sort through all their data. That's why I'm hoping something like player data can eventually, we can move towards something like that. That's kind of spits everything out a lot quicker for us. But I think that's the thing, is like the other, and we have it for basketball as well. And the one thing that I guess I go back and forth on is all of this is to not say that we need to make practice easier. In my opinion, what actually we need to do is we need to make practice harder in terms of like the speeds and the efforts and the density. It just needs to be just less of it, right? So again, I know you're going to understand this, and most people that are going to listen understand this. I go back to the weight room. Like if you go in and do a 1 rep max, like you're not sore the next day, right? You're really not sore. But if you go in and do a 10 rep max, like you're not gonna be able to walk tomorrow, right? So it's one of those where like I think you can there has to be an idea of what can we figure out utilizing that GPS metrics. Okay, this phase of practice is played at we're doing it at 8 miles an hour for 20 minutes. That's very low games. That's very low speed for a very long time, versus this phase of practice. We had guys hitting 17, 18, 19, 20 miles an hour, and we only did it for 5 minutes. We can do more of those phases, right? Or longer, and get rid of some of that junk volume. But again, I don't know, maybe that junk volume is the most important aspect because it is the teaching time, right? So again, we just hired a new basketball coach, and I was having that conversation with him a little bit about like what part of practice is the most important part of practice. Is it the walkthrough? Is it the shooting drills? Or is it the live 5-on-5, right? Because you play the game live 5-on-5. You don't walk through the game, and you don't do shooting drills in a game, right? So but you have to still do those other things. So I think what you mentioned about doing like 7-on-7, like pat and go like 3 days in a row, like that's whether that's good or bad, that's one of those examples of like maybe it's just doing the same things 3 days in a row isn't great. Like, if I go in and max out in the weight room 3 days in a row, then something might get broken, right? I might wear down. I might, run the tread too thin on the tires. But if I go in and max out once a week or twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays, that's the way that I think about. I think again, I can only think of things in a strength coach mindset because I have never coached a sport before. So when I think of that, like again, I think that's something else from a culture and like educational standpoint. Our coaches and our athletes will come to us and be like, "Hey, are we really hitting 90% for a single today in the middle of the season?" It's like, yeah, because you're only doing 7 or 8 actual reps. Like, look at your workout. You're doing 3, 3, 3, 1, 1, right? You're doing 8 reps today. That's all you're doing, or whatever that would be. 11 reps today. That's all you're doing, right? So it's one of those things, and only 2 or 3 of those reps are actually above, actually a training stimulus like level of intensity. So it's one of those where like figuring out how to take that strength coach approach and help me better understand, better communicate with coaches. I'm just always interested to kind of hear how other people are thinking about it. I don't know if you guys have had that kind of conversation in terms of trying to relate it to like S&C kind of percentages and efforts and RPEs and things like that. But that's kind of where I'm stuck at with it.
And how much of the, we might call it junk volume, but like in the game of football specifically, that's how much of it is building the mental resilience. And like what I would argue the most important part of the game is like it's so cliche to say, but like the mental toughness aspect. Like, yeah, there's not like some residual strength or speed quality that is necessarily being touched on, but like, is it developing them to be better come Saturday in the fall? Like, maybe, probably. I think the communication piece to the coaches is so interesting because you have to be willing to communicate on our end is what I mean. But you also have to be willing to be like, this isn't a situation where, I think I need to prove how much I know, or I need to protect these guys. Like they need to go through it. So yeah, it's fluid, I guess I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And it's even in the weight room context, like there's times where like, I don't think we should be doing freaking max, we do it in the spring. We have like our hardest phase at Fairmont where I like almost don't care about volume at all is those first like 6 to 7 weeks of the spring where we are like actually just, hey, we're going to go in here and we're going to do AMRAP sets on your last set of squats. We kind of do like an APRE kind of setup.
Yeah.
And we're going to go in here and we're going to have 85 to 95 to 100% of your estimated 1RM on the bar. And we're just going to go. And like, if you can't walk tomorrow, that's actually okay right now this time of year. Right. Yeah. So I think there is a time of of year where, like you said, that kind of that junk volume is there because that's what's building. It might be beating your body down, but it's building up, just the mental aspect of, hey, we can go through some stuff where like when my legs are tired and I'm on these like 5 reps of squats, but my training partner got 8 reps, like I'm going to figure out a way to squeeze out 3 or 4 more reps. So I definitely think there's a lot of truth in that as well. You mentioned hamstrings, and I know injuries are like a touchy subject, and some people don't even like to talk about them and be open about them, and that's okay too. Um, Obviously, hamstrings are probably more of just like you said, a workload aspect. What has been anything else that you guys have felt like, and maybe not even just injuries, but other like areas of emphasis in the weight room that you feel like has been really beneficial to like supporting the normal stuff that, like, the normal, the squats, the benches, the power cleans? Has there been anything else that you guys have done for maybe an injury return to play? Like, you've dealt with a lot of injuries, so you're trying to figure out, or maybe not a lot. You've dealt with a certain type of injury, like consistently, that you're trying to alleviate, and or you're just trying to be proactive and introduce some prehab type things with injuries. Because, like I said, we've had our biggest ones are shoulders. We just get a lot of like AC joints and labrums, which again, I think most of that is just the game of football, right? Guys
Right.
just getting yanked when they're trying to get off of a block or make a tackle, and then just wear and tear from tackling and blocking. And then, I mean, really, we've soft tissue, like acute soft tissue stuff really hasn't been bad. Knock on wood. We have then had some like knees, and a lot of those come with, freshmen, guys that are just undertrained like that. I tied up to, like, we just gotta get guys more resilient. Like, that's really what some of those catastrophic knee injuries are. But what are some things maybe that you guys have dealt with or that you're trying to not have to deal with, I guess I could say?
Yeah. No, I think, I could go on and on about my belief in prehab and pre-work and whatever you want to call it. And like, I look at it through the lens of when I train myself. And when I train as a 29-year-old that feels 100, like I am touching everything to warm up. I'm getting a general warm up. I'm increasing my heart rate. I'm doing hip work and trunk work, or if it's upper body, shoulder and all this stuff. So I'm a huge believer in it. I think one thing we definitely wanted to attack that has become pretty consistent in this program. The first thing we struggled a lot with was like tendonitis. So of course we're going to absolutely hammer isos and all different planes and be super consistent and increase the time and increase the load and get the kids where we want them to be, whether it's like a split squat or like a heel elevated split squat or a wall sit or a Spanish squat. And then same thing with upper body, like how to enhance like shoulder isos and shoulder mobility and scapular mobility and all those things. So I, I think our program, we try to make it as well-rounded, as robust as possible with all of those things in mind. We do pre-work here. So, and this took a long time to do, and I credit to all of my coaches, but the kids are expected to be upstairs, weighed in 10 minutes prior to the lift. As soon as they're weighed in, there's a board up there with a couple coaches, and they're taking themselves through pre-work. And the way we kind of do it is, things that are going to flush soreness that might be prevalent from the day prior, things that are going to prep them for their what they have like coming up. If it's an upper body day, like we might have a snow angel variation, knowing that we're going to do like a loaded snow angel type deal in the lift. And then the third usually is something feel good, some sort of, I get a hard time for this all the time because I'm kind of a stickler on static stretching before being warm, but like sometimes it might be a bit of a static stretch or some sort of mobility or overhead squat. And it's become routine. And what it's done for us is it's enhanced our training to where they're doing 10 to 15 minutes of this work on their own at a pretty high and efficient level. And now we don't have to spend time out of the actual core lift doing banded stuff or 90/90s or cars or snow angels or whatever. We'll still do it, obviously, but that's a piece to it. And then the other piece is like training clean ranges of motion. And I think everyone thinks about squat when I say that, and I definitely think about it. Like I need the hardest part for me on the floor is not necessarily training my guys at my racks, but it's making sure that the whole room is doing what they need to do in a clean and safe range of motion. So, obviously those things, you can't prevent anything, you can't prevent injuries, but regardless, when they happen, that thing goes off in your mind where you're like, what could I have done? What could this player have done? Why did this happen? What was this? When it comes to soft tissue, I think I heard someone finally say this. It might have been on one of your episodes or it might have been elsewhere. I can't remember, but a hamstring pull, like, okay, he pulled his hamstring. It could be due to X, Y, and Z, but could it have been far worse? Is the hamstring pull as the final result the worst case scenario? In my head, often, typically not. It's everything that we've trained them to do, protecting their bodies. And I don't know, maybe that's just something that makes me feel better and sleep a little longer at night. But I try not to get lost in them. Also, at any level, even the levels that can provide 6 meals a day, like nutrition and education, you can never get enough. So you ask, like, what are some things that kind of helped us separate ourselves? A big piece is the demand that my coaches and myself constantly communicate the importance and the education of things like nutrition and things like recovery. Our head coach has me talk every day at the end of practice, and a big piece for me is I can't go up there and just say nonsense. And I don't always want to be the guy that, the czar of nutrition, but like I know that he loves when I go up there and remind them of nutrition and hydration and sleep and recovery and all those things. So education is a big piece, obviously, as well.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that is along the same lines as what we do as well. And we definitely do like try to do a kind of like a prehab cert complex, like a post training complex. And it is tough in season too, because we only get these guys for like 45 minutes twice a week. Like it is really
Yeah.
tough. You talk about going through the proper range of motion. I mean, I think that's huge. That's something that like, that's to me such an easy fix. Like if I were to get hired somewhere else and I walk into the weight room and like the first thing I'm looking for is are people doing everything with high, like rep integrity, high quality reps. Because I think that's an easy, like I said, an easy immediate fix. Like it's easy to explain why. Like, look, hey, you're doing your pull-ups like this. Okay, well now you're only strong right here. Wait till you get out of here. Like wait till you get out of this range of motion. So it's just one of those for me. That's a big one. And I agree with you in terms of the injury thing too. And I'm sure you've seen the Buddy Morris quote. Anybody that knows me knows I say this all the time. And I say it's kind of like a coach speak thing where it's like a pat on the back of a string coach. Like it's like one of those things where it make us as string coaches feel better about ourselves. And that's not why I say it. I just say it because it's reality of, Buddy Moore says that he talks about if you don't want to get hurt, don't play sports. Right. He worked for the Cardinals, still works for the Cardinals as their string coach. And, was it TJ Watt, JJ Watt, which guy was with the Cardinals? JJ Watt had, I don't remember the number. It's like 15 surgeries in 11 years of an NFL career, right? And that dude spent millions of dollars on nutrition and recovery, hyperbaric chambers, and had the best strength coaches in the world, and all had the best supplements and all this stuff in the world, the best genetics, right? Had all of those things, and the guy still got hurt and still missed playing time, and missed seasons and missed games and missed practices and all that, and was getting paid way more than any of the athletes that either one of us are working with, right? So there's an aspect of, we also have to realize that, your third string long snapper probably isn't going to get hurt as much as your starting safety or your starting linebacker is. Like that's just an unfortunate reality of playing athletics, right? Or playing college athletics. Your walk-on point guard on the basketball team that's 5'7" is probably not going to get hurt like your 6'9" forward is that's playing 40 minutes a game. Like it sucks because you need that guy healthy, and that kid wants to be healthy. The strength coach, the trainers, we want them to be healthy. But that kid's also at a higher risk because he's doing higher intensity stuff. He's just a higher operating machine. So, it's the Honda Accord versus the Lamborghini mentality, right? Like the Honda Accord is going to run for 300,000 miles. You can never change the oil in it ever again, and it's going to still be all right. So there is that aspect of it. But as you mentioned, like, and I feel the same way. The thing that I probably lose more sleep over than anything is when one of the kids, especially the kids that is a hard worker and is a bust your butt type of kid, like when they get injured and they miss any time at all, whether it's one practice, one game, or one season, I'm equally as pissed off about it. So it's always interesting to kind of talk to other other strength coaches, because I feel like we're all kind of like in that same like limbo of like, yeah, we do want to prevent injuries as best we can, but then we also understand that that's a fake thing that we really can't, we can't completely achieve. So anyway, what does just real quick, we'll kind of go through this because I do want to get into some of just like some like young coach advice kind of questions here at the end, but just kind of wrap up like training and football players. What does your guys like? So you're going to get your guys back here in a couple weeks. So if you want to start with that, what does like your summer look like? Like how many days a week are they with you? How many days a week are you taking them through like strength, speed, power development? How many days are conditioning? Um, what does it look like when you guys get into the fall season? How many days a week are you guys going? And again, you can go as in depth, or you could just be like, hey, we live Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and move on to the spring. Whatever, however, as much depth as you want to provide. And I'm sure I'll have follow-ups if I feel like you didn't provide as much depth as what I wanted to hear. So kind of just take us through. They're about to come back here in a couple of weeks in the summer. What does that look like? What does the fall look like? And then what does kind of the spring look like slash winter?
Yeah, so they've been off since our spring game was April 18th. And that was the last thing they did with us. So they've had plenty of time. And I am glad because the summer, like leading into the fall, becomes such a grind mentally as a player. Like I know that every year, no matter how good of a culture or whatever, like last couple weeks, it's getting chippy because they want to play football and they want to do what they came here to do. So I need to, first and foremost, like we got to acclimate them. They've been off for 6 weeks. Like those first 2 weeks are critically important. My assumption is they didn't do anything at all. They never left the couch, whatever it might be. So the first 2 weeks are going to be critical. A marker of if they were successful in some sort of maintenance while they were off is, are they within their body weight range that we provide them, or at least near it? Especially those fringe guys that have trouble gaining, might have trouble losing, whatever it might be. Football nowadays it's just a lot more running. It's a lot more, less in the trenches and more spread out. We need to get them within a reasonable accumulated distance in the summer going into camp. So in the past, we might have done 3 days of running, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. This year, it's going to look like 4 days. So, we have to really hone in and understand how and when to microdose, what we need to microdose. And like I kind of talked about earlier, like football is so many things at once. So the young coaches that will say, oh, I'll never run a 110, like that's cool, but like there is a conditioning piece to it. So there's getting distance on their legs and that. There's also the conditioning piece. There's also sprinting multiple, hitting 90 at least twice a week in the safest possible manner. I'm a visual guy, so I don't have it up right in front of me. I can't tell you exactly what each day looks like, but 2 upper days, 2 lower days, some version of running or field work every single day, hopefully putting us in the best position possible come camp, right? You might have some soft tissue early on, but kind of the way we're looking at it is at least it's early on. We can get it back to where they need to be and ready to play the game that they're here to play and help us win in the fall. So, as far as in-season goes, our developmental kids are typically developmental. When I say that, it's exclusively freshmen, just because if you're not making it exclusive, the group just grows and grows and grows because the coach might be like, hey, so-and-so's not playing this week. Let's throw them in Devo. Then it throws off their whole training plan. Those guys will lift typically 3 days a week. Our travel guys, varsity guys, whatever you want to call them, those guys will lift twice a week. In camp, it'll be Tuesday, Thursday. Tuesday is going to be the most physical practice. So we'll come back in the afternoon. That'll be the hardest lift. It's a lower body lift, your posterior hamstring and squats, whatever. And then Thursday is typically going to be an upper body. So that's kind of the model that we mirror going in. Devo's going to stay 2 days a week because obviously we don't know technically who those guys are in fall camp. Once we transition, then they'll go to 3 days and then 2. I don't provide too many extra opportunities to guys because I do know the demands of football in school. And like, yes, we've got a great group of guys that always wants to do extra. I think the way to service them is provide them what extra looks like. So we try to always have some sort of maintenance card ready for them to take or some sort of thing they can work on. I typically know what those things are going to be. But I think ultimately, like, just because their sleep is already bad enough and their sleeping habits aren't good and their nutrition habits aren't what they should be, like, I try to talk them off the ledge, I guess, sometimes of doing anything extra. So I'm not someone that needs to be like, hey, the weight room is so important. We have to do it 3 or 4 times a week in season. Like, no. The football season is important. That's why I have a job, is our success on the field. So we need to make sure I try not to fall too much into this trap, but like freshness and availability is king. So whatever we have to do in the weight room is obviously super important, but in the same breath, like, these are college athletes, like the stimulus they're going through, like, I don't want anything to do with that. I've been through that. I'm good. We need to keep it, within the line. So obviously that was kind of a simple answer.
No, that's good. I mean, that's basically kind of what I expected. I guess the only question I would have is, and honestly, I agree with you on the extra. That goes back to like minimal effective dose. Like in season, it's absolutely, especially from an S&C standpoint, that's minimal effective dose. Like, if you want to go and do a bunch of shoulder burnouts and abs and all that kind of stuff, I just like, man, you barely can recover from 5 practices in a game and 2 lifts now. Like, let's be smart about it. But the biggest question I guess I would have is the lifting schedule. Obviously, you guys play most of your games on Saturdays. Are you guys lifting Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday, Wednesday? Like, what does that schedule look like? And then is that one of those an upper and a lower? Or are those 2 total body days? What does that look like?
It's a great question. In the past, so I'll speak for travel. In the past, we're a morning team. So we'll practice in the morning. On Tuesdays, we'll have like 3 groups that'll come back and they'll hit their lift then. And that's going to be the hardest day. I've done the Sunday thing before and not a huge fan of it.
Yeah.
At least where like I totally get it and like I'm not gonna bash it. Just for us, I didn't care for it. I know our coaches got to a point where they're like, not great. So we would train on Tuesdays and that would be our upper day. Total body, or I'm sorry, it would be our lower day, total body, but lower emphasis. And then Thursday would become kind of a total body, upper emphasis, primer day type of deal. Speed bench, med ball slams, explosive stuff like that. Developmentally, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 a.m. It's going to be hard. Friday's going to be the hardest. You don't have to play on Saturday. Kind of setting them for success in the winter. I'm trying to think. I got like 2 years of information. So when we did 3 days a week, we would do all of our accessory stuff on Sundays. So we would do like our hamstring stuff, some single leg work. Like, we didn't do anything at the racks. We did all accessory movements. On Monday, on Tuesday, we would do an upper body. And then on Thursdays when we would squat, and that would be like banded speed squats, overcoming isos, slams, things like that. This past year, we did Tuesday lower, Thursday upper. Very simple. This year in season, we're going to lift on Mondays. Our hardest practice is still going to be Tuesday. So for us, it's going to be that challenge of manipulating what we need to do on Monday, but not let it take away from anything on Tuesday. And then Thursday, I'll probably stay some sort of upper body, explosive, whatever deal. But on those Tuesday practices, our tentative plan is to, I think it was kind of the Herbert approach at Michigan, and I'm sure a ton of other coaches do it, but the guys that didn't hit 90, they're going to have 3 opportunities to hit it post-practice, and then we're also probably going to have like our skilled guys do 2 or 3 sets of Nordics post-practice. And that the biggest challenge with that is really just logistics and herding cats. So
Right.
in 3 months, I'll check back in and let you know how that goes. But that's our tentative plan.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense too. And honestly, there's something to be said about, and I've heard of other, places doing this. Do you know Chandler Daniel at Cal? He used to be at Cal, now he's at Austin P.
Hmm.
He Cal PA, just up the road here, D2. Anyway, I think what he was telling me was, and I don't know if they do this in the fall, but I know in the spring when he was at Cal, their football team would practice in the morning, and then he would get them at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I think there's obviously pros and cons to that situation all the time. But that is one thing that I noticed is like when we got our like we don't lift our guys any earlier than 8 a.m. during the season. Like that's our first group. Um, which again, I think 8 a.m. is like plenty of time to sleep in, but I also realize that like, some of these guys, even on a Monday night, they're sometimes finishing up schoolwork and film and individual meetings and things like that, 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And by the time they go and have any type of social life or time, by themselves, like they're still getting to bed at midnight or later. Um, but I also would wonder how it would have influenced the weight room to have them practice in the morning versus lift in the morning. I think for some teams, I think it would be better, and some of our athletes, I think, would be better. But I do wonder about football because, like you said, on that Sunday, we don't do any lifting on Sunday. We do like a pool recovery or like a stretch or like soft tissue stations, or we just give them that morning off if we feel like that's the best thing for them. Um, but I don't know how we could ever lift our guys on Sunday. Like our guys are usually so beat up and so just like sluggish and go. I mean, it's hard to get guys. We'll have guys that can't get into the pool because the trainers say that they're so beat up that they just need to stay in the training room and get treatment. Um, so it's one of those things for me. Like I don't know how a lift would be productive, but I also wonder then how would our guys be in the weight room after going through a hard Tuesday practice? And is that part of the reason maybe why you guys moved that Tuesday lift to Monday? Like what was the reasoning for that? And is that something that you guys have seen where again, I'm probably biased, but I personally believe that lift very rarely takes away from practice, at least on the same day. But practice is almost always going to take away from lift, which in season is getting better at your sport is still the number one priority. But at what detriment to actually even any benefit from the weight room at that point, any stimulus that you're actually trying to get. So, has that been an issue? And then what was their logic of switching the Tuesday and the Monday?
It's a tremendous question, and I'll tell you the story of 2025 is when we got to spring ball. We knew in our heads in the past when the weight room comes around, or I'm sorry, when football is introduced, the weight room becomes a byproduct at best. It's not organized. It was chaotic. It was guys coming in racks starting whenever. So like two things needed to change when we got to spring ball of 25. One is we're going to start as a group and I'm going to address them. I don't care if I just talk to them outside or whatever it might, or I guess that doesn't play, but I'm talking to them. I'm addressing what the expectation is, and we are going to freaking train hard. And we did not really pull a whole lot back last year because of where we're at as a program. So going into the fall, and again in the past, those Tuesdays were chaotic. It was barbershop hours, like we started whenever coaches would kind of take their guys whenever they came up. And I'm not criticizing like that. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. But for us as a team, we needed order, we needed structure. So we condensed the group size. We ended up only having two groups. I talked to them, I addressed them. I didn't care if they came up in their football pants as long as they had their shoes on still. But we're resetting our focus, we're resetting our expectation, and we're going to train as a group. And it went from like herding cats and not being efficient to being really, really efficient and really, really productive. So, did I enjoy doing that after a Tuesday practice? Like, certainly not. I understand that practice is going to take away and I'm going to have to make adjustments. But I think what we were able to do in the springtime made it much more beneficial and the guys got a lot more out of it. So just like introducing that structure in a time that you would think doesn't have structure. So, just talk about cultural pieces, like what I'm on their asses all the time about is like what you do in here has to translate out there and what you do out there has to translate in here. Like you can't be on two different wavelengths. So I've seen it to where, sure, you could say, oh, it's just a Tuesday. We got to get through it. At least we hit our Nordics. Like at least we squatted. Like it just wasn't good enough. So it took a long time to get to that point. And the most credit to all the players. Like it could have been a little chaotic and kind of shitty, but to their credit, like it wasn't. But it is also very easy to come off the field after a Tuesday in September and cramp or have a a screwed up wrist or shoulder or knee, whatever it might be. So yeah.
Yeah, that's and that'd be my biggest fears. I do think, like, obviously when I was in pro baseball, I mean that's something that's big in pro baseball is guys go out and they do all their skill work, they play the game, whatever, then they come in and lift afterwards. Um, but it definitely takes away the quality of the lift. So it's finding that happy medium of, what's best for developing the football player on the field versus what's best developing them as an athlete, like off the field. Like we got to figure out how to make that work. So, um, anyway, moving just into like some kind of last minute questions here. And obviously I would still consider myself a young coach. I mean, you said you're 29, I'm 36. I still feel like I'm young and kind of in this profession. That goes back to that imposter syndrome and, of all this. But essentially coaches younger than us, coaches that have, maybe have not had a full-time job yet, a head coaching job. Um, what do you think is like one piece of advice or like multiple pieces of advice, I guess, that you would give to a young coach? Whether that's like the GAs that you have that work with you guys, or just somebody pulls you aside at a conference somewhere and is like, "Hey, what would be your advice for me? I'm about to graduate. What should I be trying to do?"
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, obviously it depended on the person's circumstance, but I think holistically, like when I got into it, I was like, oh, I'm going to intern for 6 months, get certified, get a job, smell you later. Like I'm going to be at whatever level. And that's never the case. You know, show me a coach that never struggled, and I guarantee they're not a successful one. So being, watering the grass where your feet are at, being as present as possible. Obviously I'm aware that like graduate assistants that come here that are on a stipend and eating out of the cafeteria and have to do schoolwork, like it sucks. It's hard. You've got high expectations, but just allowing yourself, kind of letting your guard down and being as present as you possibly can with the job that you're at, whether that's an intern, whether that's a graduate assistant, whether that's a part-time, a full-time that wants to move up. There's a lot of times where I'll talk to Hunter and we joke like how fun it would be to spend a week as an intern again, because like what you're doing is kind of cathartic. Like the work at the time might seem like it sucks, but there's so much you're learning from it. And there's no, there's repercussions if you screw something up and you get yelled at, I guess, but like there's no pressure. So developing with where you're at, I think is brutally important. Youngstown State, when I came here, like I didn't expect to be here for 5 years. I certainly didn't expect to be the head guy for going on my third season. And it's easy to reflect and realize the importance, because had I like now my daughter was born here, I've spent 5 years in the same home with my wife. Like if I would have just rushed or jumped at some dumb opportunity because I'm chasing a title or doing whatever, like I wouldn't have the opportunities I've had. And of course, you're going to have to bet on yourself and you're going to have to go do those things. But I think taking pride and finding a good perspective of where you're at is going to pay much bigger dividends. And when I look at someone's resume and I've seen that they've been at 6 different places in 2 years, like it doesn't really impress me. It kind of just throws a red flag up. So that would be my advice to anyone, whether they're new in anything or they're, if for whatever reason an old head wants to ask me advice, I don't know why they would, but
I mean, I think I think asking anybody for advice is beneficial.
yeah,
And again, like I said, that's why I do this. But the one thing that you said that I never really thought about before is you said going back and being an intern again. Like I think there's something to that. I think there's something to the idea of like knowing what I know now, 12 years into this. If I went back and it did basically follow the exact same career path that I did, I got to like replay it all, right? And not to the sense of like a nostalgia, like, oh, I would have made these changes, but almost go back and have the same knowledge I have now. Like how much more would I have actually have also been able to learn, because I've just been able to think of things. Yeah, I might be over here cleaning off like the treadmills while I'm watching, the coaches at WVU coach the weight room. But instead of me like watching the coaches just yell at the kids, maybe now I'm going to watch the kids and I'm going to be like, how did those kids respond to what that coach was saying in the way that he said it. Like, what was that coach looking at that made him want to even say it like that? So there's almost an idea of like, you kind of like get to go back, you know, and again, that goes back to developing young coaches. Like, there's times where I take things for granted. Like, I know that as a coach, as a mentor, like, I just assume that you should know some of the things that I take for granted. And I have to realize like, oh shit, like maybe I didn't show you that the best that I probably could have, because I have been doing that, you know, mindlessly for 12 years. Right. So there is an aspect of like, you know, having that, you know, I do martial arts, and that's something we talk about, having that white belt mentality, right? Always realizing that you're a white belt no matter how far in your career you get. Because that's something that I do think that I take for granted at times. Like, I take for granted, and I, you know, whatever it is, arrogance, ego, whatever it is, you kind of just like, I did that. I don't need to do that anymore. But I think it's like, yeah, but go back and do it again, but do it now with the experience that you have, and it's probably going to even more meaningful. So, and you know, we do that at Fairmont. I'll make us do like a staff cleaning a competition just to see who still has the best intern skills at cleaning a rack and, you know, wiping down benches and stuff. What about advices on, like, so obviously that's huge advice of be where your feet's at. You know, water the grass around you, plant a tree that you'll never see grow, like those kind of mentalities. Like, I love that. What about in terms of like actual like practical things that maybe you feel like some of the young coaches need to get better at? Like, is it those communication skills? Is it time management? Is it, you know, picking up a book and reading it and studying habits? Like, what are some things, maybe like actual, like applied practical things that you would give advice to, or that you see young coaches struggling with right now?
You know, something that young coaches that I see struggle with is hard because they definitely don't realize they're struggling with it. Is, you know, thinking that you know or you have all the answers, and also thinking that you're going to find answers in a research article. You're not. It's going to give you a niche piece of insight on something you might not have known before, but that is not like practical intelligence. You know, watching, like, I'll sit up when I'm done lifting and the other teams are coming in, and I'm, you know, I'll be on the bike, you know, the Echo bike, doing just a little extra cardio or something, and I want to watch and see what are these other young coaches doing, because just like they can learn from me, I can definitely learn from them. Whether it's, you know, our graduate assistant who's working with women's soccer, like there's movements, there's things, there's coaching cues that like I can learn. So watching your peers, and then not only watching, but like maybe following up with them and asking them questions. Sometimes I get a little mad that people don't ask me more questions, and I feel like I'm very approachable, but maybe it's something I need to, you know, for me, I need to go out of my way and be more inquisitive with them. So I think asking questions, but I heard this on a podcast years ago, or maybe someone said it to me, I can't remember, but before you ask a question, try to answer it yourself, because that process you'll learn more from that than just getting a response back. So kind of like that two-parter, like thinking about it, processing it, and then once you've kind of exhausted that, going and being inquisitive with other people and not being afraid. Like, don't be afraid to come off sounding unintelligent. You know, we didn't hire you and think you're dumb. That's not the case at all. Obviously, there's belief, and there's also knowledge that I know you're not as experienced as I might be in certain things. So of course we're not going to be, I hate to say same level. That's not what I mean, but like, you're a young coach, you've got a lot to learn. I know that. I don't have like impossibly high expectations. So being willing to kind of be vulnerable, to know that you don't have the answers. You're not going to find them in a freaking research article or book, no matter how insightful those things might be or helpful they might be. Like, you're going to get it from practically watching and being a student of that, if that makes sense. And obviously open to feedback, which is the hardest thing for all of us. Like, when someone gives you criticism, everybody's first like thing that they do is get defensive. Like, how can we not be like that, I guess. So there's kind of a slew of advice in there. Yeah, that would be my answer. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's good. And the one thing that stood out to me is, I think something that's kind of started to be lost is the critical thinking aspect. So you mentioned like, okay, you're going to go ask this coach this question. Hey coach, why are you doing, you know, whatever, front foot elevated versus foot flat on the ground? Or why did you make, like, we make our athletes train with their shoes off a lot. Why did you have your athletes take your shoes off? I've never seen somebody do that before. All right. And I just had an intern this spring that would ask those questions. And sometimes I think it was a genuinely asked question, but sometimes I think it was just asking questions just to like show that they were kind of like paying attention,
Right.
where they didn't really care about the answer, right? And I think what you said is like start using your critical thinking skills, start thinking of the answer to the question and see if that's what what the coach said. And then if that's not what they said, then it's like, oh, that even opens up a bigger question, because now your own like preconceived like biases have been not only are like wrong, right? We're going to say wrong. Not only are they wrong, but now this other person has completely maybe shed light on something that you didn't even think about of why they're doing what they're doing. So I think that's a huge part of that. And I agree. I mean, it's funny because I'm actually some of my current staff and previous staff, we're doing like a little research paper journal club this summer. And I said it earlier about the research-based practice versus practical-based research. And it's one of those things where like I like reading research papers, but I've never read a research paper and I'm like, oh, that gives me something like that I'm going to start doing that exercise, because it's really more like it's kind of confirming why I think what we're doing actually works. Like,
Yeah.
okay, why do I think that, like, again, I didn't ask you this, but and you can elaborate on this if you want, but like, the whole debate on like Olympic weightlifting versus not using Olympic weightlifting, like whatever, maybe I think there are pros and cons. I think there's certain groups of athletes that it works really well for. I think football is one of those sports that it's amazing for. Um, but also then I can go to the research and I can read about the research about what Olympic weightlifting actually does for your rate of force development, right? So that's like confirming what I think its benefit is, but now I can confirm it with research versus the other way around. What do you got? What is your thoughts on that? And what do you guys utilize for most of your power development? Are you guys doing a lot of Olympic weightlifting for football, or at least derivatives of it?
Yeah, I mean, we catch cleans, we hang clean. That's the extent of it. And I'll preface that with I'll give Hunter all his flowers. At Cincinnati, my first year, we were very Olympic based. But my practical intern experience and like true player experience when I got a little older, when we had that new staff with Coach Collins, it was not that. I mean, the most we did was like clean pool and high pool. And we never really progressed it too much. Obviously, we did a whole bunch of sprinting and jumping. We just never really caught. That wasn't their thing. That's not what they wanted to do. When I took over, in terms of freshness, I was like, I kind of want to do this, but I don't have the tools to teach it. And that's where I relied on Hunter, who's a weightlifting wizard. He at one point was going to compete. Now, like I said, he's obsessed with coding, which we got to kind of correct. But, I had him to lean on to say, what is our progression going to look like? How are we going to get there? So like fall of 24, we did nothing but like pool variations, twice a week. And then the kids didn't realize it, but once we got back in winter and the next off season, like now we're progressing it. Now we've got progressions. Now we've got corrections. We've got mobility with it. So that's the most we do. We don't have the most space in the world. Like if we wanted to do a bunch of overhead stuff, I would be kind of hesitant that these guys would launch a barbell backwards. And now we're talking about me looking for a new job, and we just don't want to get down that rabbit hole. But I don't have as much experience with it, so I'm not going to like die on the hill. But you got me still? Coach?
Sorry, coach. Are you there?
Yeah, I got you.
My Google Chrome decided to update right then and there, and it literally closed me out and said Google Chrome hasn't updated. So I'm not really sure if this is still recording. It looks like it is. Yeah, it is recording. So sorry about that.
You're
But yeah,
good.
finish your thought. Obviously, you said like going overhead and stuff wasn't necessarily maybe the safest method for you. But
Yeah, our space just doesn't, it's not super indicative of it. And to be honest with you, I'm good with where we're at with cleans. I think we've done a good job progressing them. But there's not too much more we would do. You know, we'll do variations like push press. I know that's
yeah,
kind of like what a
yeah,
lot of people do, and but that's
yeah.
where we're at.
Right. No, and I get that too. I mean, and like I said, there's some teams here at Fairmont that there's teams that I program for that are going to be doing a lot of Olympic weightlifting variations, and then there's teams that will never, like our baseball team. I don't think our baseball team has ever. I think the most they've ever done is like a jump shrug, like a clean pull. They've never caught a bar. They've never done a snatch. We've done some landmine like jerks, stuff
Mhm.
like that, but that's about it. That's the extent of what we do, and I think it's really just not a one size fits all thing for exercise selection. It's you have to know your demographic, you have to know the sport, and is it going to even fit? Are the guys going to buy into it, or is my baseball pitchers going to want to catch a bar on their shoulders? And some of them might. Like the thing is, I've had baseball guys ask me why we don't do it. I'm like, well, there's about 4 or 5 guys on the team that I feel like would actually care enough and try hard enough to want to do it, and then there's the other guys that don't. So why would I? Why would I try to,
Sure.
square peg into a round hole situation? So, um, really, the only last thing that I was gonna to ask is kind of just like um, in terms of just your own personal development, what are some things that you try to hone in on? I mean, are there certain books that you would recommend? Is there things like other podcasts or YouTube channels that you like to do, or what do you read? And again, I know we kind of bashed like the you can only listen and read to so much stuff, but you got to just get on the floor and coach, which I definitely agree with. But what are some things that maybe you like to do, or you like to just kind of help just maybe grow your thought process with some things.
100%. I mean, one thing I learned early on is the amount I'm speaking in front of the team, whether that's team meetings, post practice, lifts, 3, 4 lift groups a day, talking to them at the end. So the importance of messaging. I I don't get like, the best strength and conditioning book I've ever read is The Golden Age of Strength and Conditioning, which is basically it's just little excerpts from legendary coaches in the field. And like I said, that's just interesting to me because you kind of learn where the field came from and developed and what these, where it's become. But, in my role now, I'm farther from the X's and O's. So it's like a lot of leadership stuff. Plus, I enjoy it anyway. I would be lying if I said I don't get on YouTube at least 3 or 4 times a week and just watch something from Coach Saban or, whoever the well-spoken football coaches are out there and try to pick up what kind of messaging can we kind of apply here, not just like steal quotes and things like that, but the ability to lead and the ability to inspire and invigorate a team is very much my job, as much as the X's and O's part are too. But those kinds of things, I do think research articles are fundamentally important, but I just think you got to be careful with what you're reading, and you can't be brazenly confident about something just because it confirmed your preconceived bias about how to train.
Right.
Um, I will tell you the number one problem I have is finishing books. I love to start books. Finishing is the problem, especially like strength books. I'll read 3/4 of it, be like, I got the gist of it, put it
Yeah.
down, and never come back. So that's something I need to work on.
Well, and honestly, I would agree with you on that in terms of some of the strength conditioning books. Like I definitely probably read more. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I have a 30-minute commute, so I listen to a ton of audiobooks. Like I probably read, or I guess I probably listen to like 3 to 4 audiobooks for every one book that I actually sit down and read. Um, and I'm the same way. I'm listening to stuff on leadership, um, personal development, that kind of stuff. I literally just got done reading a book that's about body language. It's literally written by an FBI detective, and it's talking about how you can read people's body language and when you can tell if somebody's nervous and when you can tell if somebody's anxious, when you can tell if somebody's excited, when you can tell if somebody's about to like rob a bank, like just that kind of stuff. So that I think that's something huge. We went back to the coach's eye, right? Like that's something that's huge as a coach. Is if I have an athlete walk through the weight room and they look like somebody just ran over their dog, and I go over and I start cussing at them, I might not get the training session that I want, right? Even if
Right.
that's what I want to do. And sometimes I have done that, made that mistake. That might not be the best coaching style in that situation. So, no, I think it's great. Well, I appreciate your time. I do not know how an hour and 50 minutes went by. That doesn't even make sense. Yeah, so I appreciate your time. This was awesome. Like I said, I'll get it. I'm actually going out of town next week, so I probably will try to get it posted at some point early next week if I can while I'm traveling, waiting in the airport and stuff like that. But I appreciate it and looking forward to seeing you guys have a good season this year, and following up with you, especially if I end up getting, and it sounds like I might need to reach out to Hunter at some point as well. Kind of do
100%.
the whole
Absolutely.
Youngstown State Grand Slam at this point.
Yeah.
So, but I appreciate your time, and honestly, I think a lot of takeaways from this. So I really do appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it too. Thank you, Coach. Do
All
you
right,
want me
yep.
to, do I need to send this since it closed out on you, or are we good?
No, it looks like it's recording. It should be fine. As long as you stayed on here, it should continue to record it. Yeah,
Perfect.
it should be good. Yeah, I've 41 episodes in now. I've had that happen before. So it
Perfect.
is what it is. It should have worked. So, but I appreciate it. Have a good one. Good luck to you guys this season.
You too. Thank you, sir.
All right. Yep.